Imagine putting every dollar you had into a railway. That only existed on paper. No tracks, no stations, no trains, and yet in the 1840s, thousands of people did just that. Ordinary families signed away their savings for shares in companies that never laid a single rail. They didn't just invest money, they invested hope, dreams of speed, of prosperity, of joining the great age of steam. But here's the paradox. They weren't buying a future. They were buying a fantasy. And it raises a haunting question. If it was all a mirage, why did people believe so fiercely? At the fever's height, those paper railways reached a capitalization equal to 15 to 20% of Britain's GDP. Think about that. Imaginary companies, some no more real than a child's drawing, were worth on paper a sum comparable to a fifth of the entire national economy. This wasn't gambling at the margins. This was the heart of society, the middle classes and the elites alike, swept into a frenzy bigger than the iron and coal that powered the age. People weren't just betting on business, they were betting on destiny. But here's the paradox that rattled even seasoned financiers. How could numbers on a ledger outpace iron and steel in value? For many, the gamble felt like destiny itself. Families mortgaged their homes, sold their shops, even risked dowries, all for the chance to become railway millionaires. It was a golden ticket to the future, and who wouldn't want one? The steam engine had already proven it could shrink distance, create cities, and build fortunes overnight. Surely the next railway would do the same. But behind the dream was a cruel truth. Not every golden ticket won. A third of those lines never left the paper, and countless investors saw their savings vanish. The winnings went to a handful of promoters. The losses to thousands of ordinary people left bankrupt. Which leaves us with the real mystery. What made this illusion so persuasive, so irresistible? Why did people trust lines on a map more than the ground beneath their feet? Because those lines came wrapped in authority. Prospectuses filled with numbers. Charters stamped with official seals. Surveys signed by men calling themselves engineers. To an ordinary investor, these weren't dreams. They were guarantees. Paper carried more weight than mud and stone. But here's the problem. When every document looks flawless, who's really checking if the promise is real? A charter from Parliament meant one thing, legitimacy. If the government gave its blessing, surely the project was safe. Surely it was more than a gamble. But the truth was murkier. MPs approved hundreds of bills with barely a glance, and some quietly pocketed shares in the very schemes they waved through. It wasn't just blind faith, it was trust, reinforced by the highest powers in the land. So tell me, with government seals shining on every page, how could an ordinary citizen possibly suspect fraud? Picture it. A glossy map spread across a drawing room table, lines running across counties, connecting towns, promising trade, jobs, and riches. Investors traced those lines with their fingers as if the journey already existed. The map wasn't a proposal. It was a prophecy. It turned imagination into inevitability. Maps became fantasy novels of the industrial age, chapters written in ink but read as iron. And whenever imagination runs faster than fact, one thing always happens. Opportunists are already waiting at the finish line. Enter the showmen, men in fine clothes with golden words. They dazzled drawing rooms and crowded halls with promises of progress, railways that would make towns rich, land valuable, and investors wealthy beyond imagination. But behind the sparkle there was nothing. No rails, no trains, only ink and charm. They were actors on a stage, selling tickets to a play that would never be performed. And here's the twist. They weren't the only ones in this theater of deception. The press became the chorus line. Financial papers trumpeted new railway schemes, printing glowing articles about boundless opportunity and inevitable prosperity. But the fine print? Many of those writers weren't journalists. They were shareholders. They took bribes in exchange for hype. The watchdogs turned into salesmen. And when the media is cheering, ask yourself, how many dare to boo? Not every expert was an expert. Some of the so-called engineers were frauds, hired to produce glowing surveys that declared even impossible routes feasible. They spoke in technical jargon few could challenge. Investors didn't see trickery, they saw authority in uniforms and titles. The illusion grew stronger with every forged report. And soon, the frenzy spilled out of Parliament halls and into the homes of ordinary people. This mania wasn't confined to bankers and merchants. It trickled down to shoemakers, farmers, even newlyweds. A cobbler in Leeds sold his shop for shares in a railway that never broke ground. Countless women invested their dowries, many losing their savings. But not every story ended in ruin. Some investors withdrew early or backed lines that did get built. This wasn't just speculation by the wealthy anymore. It was survival money, and for many, the risk felt worth taking. When life savings turn into lottery tickets, desperation replaces reason. And if you want to feel the frenzy, you need to step inside the coffee houses. Picture the scene. Cafes packed with men shouting over each other, papers in hand, ink-stained clerks scribbling numbers as prices rose by the hour, the air thick with smoke and sweat, fortunes seemingly made and lost in the space of a conversation. For a brief, intoxicating moment, every man felt like a financier. But there's a dangerous truth about bubbles. When everyone is winning, on paper, nobody asks hard questions. And then, just as suddenly, the cheering stopped. The dream could not last. When the truth emerged, some lines had no rails, no trains, no future. Paper fortunes dissolved overnight. The golden tickets turned to dust. Families that had wagered everything woke up bankrupt, while others escaped with profits. The great age of progress revealed its cruel underbelly. Not a triumph of steam, but a theater of illusion. And here's the chilling part. This wasn't a one-off disaster. It was a pattern humanity keeps repeating. The railway bubble wasn't the first mania. Long before locomotives, fortunes were lost over something far more delicate: tulips. A flower so rare, so exotic, that people in 17th century Holland traded bulbs as if they were bars of gold. At the height of the craze, one bulb could buy a house. It sounds absurd now. And yet, in the 1840s, the same fever returned. Only this time, the object of obsession wasn't a flower, it was a promise of progress. Investors poured money into railway shares like they once did into tulips, chasing beauty, hope, and the chance to belong to something bigger. But tulips withered, and so did paper railways. And here's the unsettling truth. That cycle didn't stop there. Swap railway for blockchain and the pitch barely changes. A new frontier, a technology that will transform the world. You're told, don't miss out. This is the future. In the 19th century, it was steam and iron. Today, it's tokens and coins. Then, it was men in waistcoats selling visions of tracks that never got built. Now, it's white papers filled with jargon about decentralization. The faces change, but the spell is the same. Investors don't just buy into products, they buy into stories. And here's the catch. Tulips faded, tokens collapse, but at least the railway bubble left behind scars you could touch. From tulips to crypto, from dot-com startups to ghost railways, the mirage never disappears. Humanity confuses innovation with inevitability. If the idea is dazzling enough, we convince ourselves it must be destiny. Every generation has its bubble, and every generation swears this time is different. This time it can't fail, but bubbles don't burst in theory, they burst in people's lives. And when the railway fantasy finally cracked, the damage wasn't just in markets or headlines, it was in kitchens, in marriages, in the quiet ruin of families who bet everything. And that's where the story turns dark again. They weren't huddled on the floor of an exchange, they were sipping tea in their parlors. Middle-class families speculated by the fireside as casually as if they were discussing theater tickets. The talk of shares and dividends became fashionable, even patriotic, a way of declaring loyalty to Britain's bright industrial future. Husbands and wives, clerks and shopkeepers, they all became day traders of fantasy, passing around paper fortunes that existed only in imagination. It wasn't shameful, it was respectable, it was progress, but patriotism didn't protect them from ruin. Picture a farmer, rough hands resting on a kitchen table, unrolling a map for his children. He traces a line drawn in bold ink. Here's where the train will run. Here's where we'll sell our crops. Here's where our lives will change. His voice carries the weight of certainty. Those lines, though, were never more than ink. No rails, no stations, no prosperity, just ghost lines across a paper landscape. And when promises vanish, optimism curdles into shame. What happens when optimism itself becomes a trap? The tragedy of railway mania wasn't measured only in lost pounds or bankrupt firms. It was measured in households where optimism turned to regret. Families sold heirlooms to cover debts. Women lost dowries that were supposed to secure their futures. Children grew up with nothing to inherit but caution. Yet it wasn't universal devastation. Some families weathered the storm, others even profited. The true cruelty lay in how hope itself, the belief in progress, became a double-edged sword, lifting some up while cutting others down. So the question becomes larger than railways alone. Because railway mania wasn't really about technology, it was about faith. Faith hijacked by greed. Ordinary people trusted the promise of progress. Promoters exploited that trust, dressing lies in the language of destiny. The result? Whole communities ruined, futures erased. That tension, trust turned into a weapon, is not unique to the 1840s. It's a shadow that follows every new frontier. Which brings us back to the central question: why do we keep falling for the same trick? The answer is brutally simple. We risk everything on promises of progress because the alternative, being left behind, feels worse than ruin. And so we lunge forward, even when the ground beneath us is hollow. The Great Railway Scam is more than a cautionary tale about steel and steam. It's proof that faith in the future, when handed to dream sellers, becomes the easiest path to destruction. Railways, dot-coms, crypto. The names change, but the mechanism doesn't. And so the lesson isn't just about railways, it's about every promise of tomorrow. So when we talk about the Great Railway Scam, it's not just about tracks that were never laid or fortunes that vanished. It's about how easily faith can be stolen, how dreams can be sold back to us until they collapse under their own weight. And maybe the real danger isn't losing money, it's learning to distrust progress itself. If this story resonated with you, I'd love for you to join the conversation. Subscribe if you want more forgotten histories of speculation and belief, give this video a like if it made you think, and leave a comment below. Do you believe optimism is what drives progress forward, or is it what makes us most vulnerable to exploitation? And if you're curious about how markets have turned poison into profit, you won't want to miss my last deep dive, the story of radium, the glowing miracle that Wall Street turned into gold, even as it killed the very people who touched it.